In this video, we're going to actually see how we can deploy our website to a production web server. Now, I use the term production loosely because what we have here is actually a virtual machine running on my computer. The important thing, however, this is Windows Server 2012, and we're going to show you how to deploy to it from scratch, how to migrate the database, and how to deal with configurations.
So let me get this straight. Not only did we teach them how to do all this stuff, but we're going to show them how to deploy a final product.
Right.
That's awesome.
Assuming you have a VPS or a dedicated host of Windows Server 2012, or maybe you just have a intranet with Windows Server running on it, following these steps will get you a working live website that you can put on your local network or the internet.
That is incredible. Let's do this.
Okay, the only thing that I've done on this machine is installed VMware Tools. I literally just spooled it up, I installed VMware Tools, and I installed Chrome. So we're looking at the absolute default configuration of Windows Server 2012. So let's go ahead and open up our Server Manager and talk about the software that we need to install onto it. Like I said earlier, Windows Server 2012 uses a web server called IIS, or Internet Information Services. We're going to have to use our Server Manager to install IIS onto our server. So open up your Server Manager, or if you haven't changed the option, the Server Manager should appear when you start up the computer, and go to Add Roles and Features. So go ahead and hit Next, choose Role-Based or Feature-Based Installations, select this machine out of the server pool, which is the local machine. Now we're going to need to add some packages. So the packages that we want, it'd be funny if I installed Hyper-V and had a virtual machine running in a virtual machine, but that's besides the point. We want the web server IIS.
You're just getting punchy now.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. I think I saw a screenshot somewhere of something dumb like that. Anyway, when you check that checkbox, it'll say the following tools are required to manage this feature, but do not have to install it on the same server. That's because you can manage IIS remotely from any computer that has access to the domain. However, we are going to be doing this locally on the server itself, so we'll be sure to hit yes on that. Now we'll hit Next. Now what I'm about to show is incredibly important, because even if you have IIS installed, you'll need to install the packages or the features that we're about to select. So under .NET Framework 4.5, we want to install ASP.NET 4.5. Make sure that .NET 4.5 is installed, which it already is. It should come by default. So at this point, this is all we need to throw into our server. We will come back to the screen a little bit later once we get to the deploy phase, but for now, all we need to do is install ASP.NET 4.5. Now we'll hit Next, and Next one more time, and we get more options.
Yay for options.
Yep. Okay, what we'll need for this, one thing we do want is dynamic content compression. I haven't talked about it, and I won't talk about it in this series, but definitely install it if you haven't already. And maybe there'll be something later on 3D Buzz about it. We don't want any of this, or rather we don't need any of this. If you guys want some of this stuff, that's fine, check it. I'm only going through the stuff that's needed. We definitely need ASP.NET 4.5, which also requires that we add .NET Extensibility 4.5, ISAPI filters, and ISAPI extensions. We'll add those features. We definitely don't want ASP. That's the old one. Okay, so we've added all the packages that we need for now. So we'll hit Next, and we'll hit Install. Alright, well, as you saw, it went a little bit faster than probably it did on your end, but yeah, we didn't want to make you guys sit through the installation process. So let's go ahead and close out now that the installation has succeeded. What this means is we now have IIS installed. Typically when I manage Windows web servers, I like to add a link to the IIS management service. Now, I could click on here and get the same thing, kind of, if I click into it or something like that. There's some sort of way to get into it from here, but I don't like to use the server manager for that. Instead, I like to open up this directly and just pin it to my taskbar and then move it over, because you'll be using this a lot if you're using a web server. Now in our IIS Management Console, we have our web server. I'm going to open up Sites, and I'm going to create a new site. So I'm going to go to right-click, Add Website. The website name is going to be simpleblog.dev. The physical path is going to be where the files are located for the website on our hard drive. There's a bunch of ways you can do this, but I'm simply going to go into the local disk C, create a new folder called websites, and then create a new folder called simpleblog.dev. Then I'm going to hit OK, and we now have C website simpleblog.dev.
Perfect.
However, I need to tell IIS what domain will actually result in this site being used. That goes under the hostname field. The domain we're going to use is simpleblog.dev. Now, you might be wondering, hey, Nelson, .dev isn't actually a real TLD, or top-level domain. It doesn't actually exist like .com and .net and stuff, so what exactly are you doing? Well, the answer is, I'm actually going to override the DNS settings on my local computer to force it to go to have simpleblog.dev route to my virtual machine. I do this for development projects because it's a whole lot easier to have your development projects being hosted on a web server like IIS and have your domain set up. I typically will use the dev TLD to distinguish it from the live sites such as .com.
That makes good sense.
Alright, we want to use all unsigned and we want to use HTTP. We're not talking about how to configure HTTPS today. And now we have a simpleblog.dev site. Well, I want to go to it. So I'm going to pull up a Chrome window on my host computer. Remember, this is my computer on my, this is the main computer. This is my Windows 8 machine. And I'm going to go to simpleblog.dev. We'll get an error. Why do we get an error? Well, the reason is that we haven't actually told my computer where the simpleblog.dev domain goes to. We do that with the hosts file. If you want to edit your hosts file to include another domain that's not included in normal DNS, go ahead and open up Notepad. However, it's going to be very important that you open up Notepad as an administrator, because the host file is only available to be written by the administrator. That's incredibly important, and you should never change that. This file can seriously mess things up.
All right, really important, must be administrator, can mess things up, so always do it right.
Yes. I'm going to go to File, Open, and hey, look, I'm already in the right file. Guess what? I really only use Notepad for editing my host file, so I'm already in the right folder. But let's walk through it for you guys. The host file is located under C, Windows, System32, Drivers, etc. Now you might be going, well, where's the host file? And that's because this open dialog box is currently locked down to just .txt files. To change that, I can just go to all files. And now a bunch of files appear. Obviously, the file that we want is called hosts. I'm going to open it, and I get my host file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add an entry that will route all requests from my local computer to simpleblog.dev to my virtual machine. So the first thing I need to do is type in the IP address of my VM. The IP address of my VM is 192.168.61.131. The domain name that I want to route to this IP address is simpleblog.dev.
Making sense so far.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to close out Notepad and make sure I hit save. And if I come over here to Chrome and refresh, I now get a server error, which is good. The reason this is good is because I am now connecting to my server. There's nothing on the there's nothing on the website, so obviously it just says access is denied, but I am now successfully connecting to it.
And that is a fine start.
Indeed. So now we actually have to get our website onto our virtual machine or our actual production machine if you're doing that. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I have MySQL installed on my server. Now, sometimes you might want to have an external server for your database connections and one for your websites. In this case, we're going to run with the configuration of having our database server and our web server be on the same server. So I'm going to go to mysql.com, go to all the way down from downloads, all the way down to download from MySQL Developer Zone for the MySQL Community Edition. because they really want you to pay for all their support and stuff, and MySQL is and always will be free. Then we're going to scroll down and find MySQL Community Server and hit download. After that, we're going to scroll all the way down again and find the download for Windows x86 64-bit MySQL installer MSI. We're just going to click download. Now we're going to scroll. They really moved things around, didn't they?
It's almost like they don't want you to find it.
They really don't. I'm just going to Google for it, okay? Download MySQL. This better give me the right link. Come on. Okay, download the community server. And I really, really want the... Oh, I want the MySQL installer. Derp.
Maybe we really don't want us to find it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so download MySQL installer. The MySQL installer will come with MySQL Workbench, the MySQL server, and the MySQL connectors, and a bunch of other things. So let's go ahead and scroll down to MySQL installer and select... It doesn't... Just because we're downloading the 32-bit version doesn't mean that the MySQL it downloads will be the 32-bit version. Make sense?
Okay.
So we're going to download it, and then it's going to try to make you log in or sign up. But there's this nice little button down here that says, no thanks, just start my download. And we now have downloaded the installer. So I'm going to open the installer, and I'm going to use it to install things.
Which oddly is what installers do.
Typically, yes, unless you're doing something wrong. I think it popped down here. Here it is. Okay, install MySQL products. We accept this license. We will do that. We will hit next. Now, we'll go ahead and, in this case, install the developer default. That's going to include MySQL Server and Workbench, as well as the connectors and all this stuff. So that's all fine. We're just installing a development version. We could say server only if we only wanted the server, which you would do in production. But in development, this is fine because we do want to have the MySQL Workbench. So I'm going to keep on hitting next, and then I'm going to hit install, and it'll download. Ooh, it looks like we ran into an error. It's not surprising, actually. MySQL Workbench CE6 was actually just released, so I'm not surprised to see that there's a problem. However, that being said, this is a very common problem that plagues many new installations of Windows. What it means is I haven't installed the Visual C++ redistributable package. Okay, we're going to hit next, and then we will configure MySQL. We'll configure it as a server machine. A server machine configuration means that it is designed to run in tandem with other server software such as a web server, whereas a development machine means that it's supposed to run in addition to all the other development software you have, and a dedicated machine means that it's going to run only MySQL, so we want a server machine. We'll enable TCP/IP networking even though we won't be using it. Let's go ahead and do next. The MySQL root password I'm just going to have be Nelson. This is a local virtual machine that nobody else has access to, so I'm just fine doing Nelson, and I think that's fine. So let's hit next again. We're going to have the Windows service name be MySQL 5.6, and we'll run it under a standard system account, even though I would recommend running it under a custom account in production. So just hit next, and it looks like our samples and examples, that's kind of funny, is being configurized. I don't know actually what that means. Why do you need to configure samples and examples?
I have no idea. Shouldn't they just be there?
I mean,
without configuring?
Yeah, I guess maybe one theory is that it's actually inserting my root password into them so they can run without me editing them. I don't know. Anyway, let's go ahead and start MySQL Workbench after setup, and hope it doesn't error out. If it does, we'll just install the redist packages for C++. And it doesn't work. So let's install the redist packages for C++, shall we?
Sounds like a plan.
We want Visual C++ 2010 redistributable package. and I accidentally typed 2012. I want 2010. I don't know what bitness MySQL Workbench runs in, so we'll try installing the x86 ones first. And if the x86 ones don't work, we'll install the... oh, God. Don't you love just like this? Look at that license. It's like, do you really want me... Do you seriously expect me to read this? Come on.
I can't think of a license really I've ever read.
Yeah, but look at this tiny little text box.
I know, it's ridiculous.
Seriously, Microsoft? Okay, let's try launching the Workbench again. And who's the most amazing troubleshooter?
You are.
Apparently. Wow, this actually looks kind of pretty.
That's very nice.
It's a lot different than the one I have. I might have to upgrade soon, assuming this one doesn't break more. Okay, we already have a local instance to MySQL configured, so I'll put in my password as Nelson, and it's going to open up my SQL editor. Wow. Whoa. Huh. Huh. Okay. Well, hopefully I still know how to use this program.
Yeah, that looks a little different.
Yeah. Anyway, the only thing that we need to do here is we need to create our schema. Because remember, we are going to be using our migration scripts to perform the actual table insertion. So I'm going to come up here to this button, which I assume is still the new schema button. And I'm going to type in simple blog dev. The collation I'm going to set to UTF Unicode. Where is my UTF-8 Unicode? Did they sort it to the top? No. UTF Unicode CI. There it is. Hit apply. Hit apply. Hit finish. We now have simpleblog.dev down here. So that's nice. We now have our database made, but we haven't actually set it up with any data. So now we have the issue. An issue. We have MySQL installed. We have MySQL Workbench installed. We have our database set up, but we don't have our code on the server. So this is where the most important part of this particular lesson comes in, and that is an introduction to a technology known as Web Deploy. Okay?
Okay. Sounds fun and interesting. Show me.
It is. Web Deploy is a really cool little deployment suite made by Microsoft that integrates directly with Visual Studio and also has command line utilities you can use to integrate with your continuous integration server. To install it, however, do not use the Web Platform installer, and I'll show you why. Let's go ahead and open up a new tab and search for Web Deploy. We'll see up here we have Web Deploy 3.5, which is the version we want. Do not press this button. Do not press this button. Do not press this button.
Do not.
Just
all right.
Just don't. Friends don't let friends press this button.
All right.
We don't press this button because this actually comes pretty much useless inside of its package. When we install this extension, it's going to use the WebPI. The WebPI installs a fairly useless version of Web Deploy that doesn't come with the hooks required for other computers to connect to this server.
All right.
So we scroll all the way to the bottom, and we click on English x64, and we get an MSI. Then we install this. Now it's important, however, to go through... No, I don't want to go through that. I don't want to participate in anything. It's important to not select typical. Typical is the issue. Typical will not install the components we need. You want to install complete. But to show you the components that aren't automatically checked, I'm going to click custom and look at this. The remote agent service is not installed, which means what?
We need that.
We do need it. We need it to connect with Visual Studio to the web server. So we're going to select yes and hit next and install. And we'll hit finish. Now, there is one more package we need. I'm going to go ahead and open up my IIS manager and close it. And then I'm going to go back to add roles and features. The reason I didn't include this feature in when we started doing this was because this feature is not necessary to have IIS installed, but it is necessary to use Web Deploy. So we're going to go through all the next buttons like we typically do with Windows software. Keep on hitting next. Keep on... actually, no. We want IIS. Is it down here? Yes. Under IIS, Management Tools, we want Management Services. See what that says? Management Services allow the web server to be managed remotely from another computer using IIS Manager. Now we'll install. Hopefully this installer will complete a little bit quicker, but my hard drive seems to, that I have this VM on is spinning rather fast. I think the server's trying to do something stupid like update itself.
Oh, God.
Installation succeeded. Awesome. So now we go back to IIS. I'll notice not a whole lot of things changed, but that's fine. No, stop that madness. Okay, so we now have simpleblog.dev. We have Web Deploy installed. We have our management services installed. Let's deploy. I'm going to come up here to Visual Studio. I'm going to come... VMware sometimes likes to hog the screen, so I have to minimize it. I'm going to come up here to Visual Studio. I'm going to right-click on Simple Blog, and I'm going to say Publish. Now I'm going to say New Profile by clicking this drop-down, and I'm going to call it, how about Local Web Server? Actually, no, I don't like that name. Let's do, let's do Local Windows Server VM. Okay, the publish method is going to be Web Deploy. The server is going to be simpleblog.dev. Remember, that resolves correctly because we created our host file edition. The site name is going to be the site name that appears in IIS Manager, which is simpleblog.dev, right?
Right.
Now I have to... I'm just going to do that. There we go. So I'm going to give it simpleblog.dev. Now the username and password has to be a username on that system that is capable of doing administrative tasks, or at least has access to IIS Manager's features that we need. Now I'm going to use my administrator account. For production, I don't recommend doing that. For production, you will set up a special IIS account that only has access to this specific site, so that if your credentials get compromised, then you won't have issues with your entire site getting hacked. Then we hit save password and validate connection. And I guess I'm going to wait a year.
Well, of course we are.
You know, I think I saw something a little bit earlier that mentioned something about failed click to detail. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Error, destination not reachable. This is the most common error you will receive with Web Deploy. The most common reason why you will receive this error is if I go into my virtual machine and I open up my services, we need to make sure that our management services are installed and running. Web management services enables remote dedicated blah blah blah. This is what we need to start running. Since this wasn't running, we will have issues. Not only am I going to start it, I'm going to go to Properties and set its startup type to Automatic so that it's always started. Coming back into Visual Studio, let's validate the connection. And we get a connection. Don't worry about this error. This error is simply saying that we don't have a trusted security certificate installed from this server, which means it doesn't really know it is who it says it is. However, we know for a fact it is who it says it is because it's a local machine running on my computer. So I'm going to say save the certificate for future sessions of Visual Studio and accept. Now we know that it connected, but it still says it failed. So now it says, error, could not connect to remote service. It returned a 403 forbidden. That's because I accidentally used the domain name. I don't know why I used the domain name. You don't use the domain name. You use the IP address. You don't want it to conflict with a site that's already on the server. And now we get a ensure that web management service is enabled. Is that the right IP address?
I thought it was.
Web management service is indeed started. What else may we not be running at this time? Blah, blah, blah. Let's check IIS Manager. Did I not start... I need to go into Management Services and enable remote connections. Hooray.
Okay, cool.
Now
You really are the best troubleshooter.
Now I apply and hit Start. Believe me, it took me a long time to work with Web Deploy, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up in this video. Despite the fact that I'm probably embarrassing myself out of all these things that I'm forgetting, at least you guys won't have to spend so much time on Google trying to figure it out. I'm going to validate connection, and we still get a failure. On the remote computer, make sure that Web Deploy is installed. And now I'm pretty sure Web Deploy is installed because I remember installing it. Those are Windows credentials. Access for unspecified clients. Allow. You know what this server probably needs?
A reboot?
Most likely.
Wait, you mean I was actually right?
It's a Windows server. What do you expect?
It only took 20 some hours, and I was actually right. All right.
Actually, I'm not. I'm just trying this to make sure all the services properly start up, because I did just install a bunch of things that might not start up again until the next reboot.
You know, you could have just let me hang on to that a little longer.
I'm sorry. I do have to check out that new MySQL Workbench. It does look pretty slick.
Yeah, it did.
I wonder if it just looks slick or if it actually works better.
Yeah, or if it's even stable.
Yeah. I have had some stability issues with Workbench in the past, but I don't know. I still use it. I'm going to send Control-Alt-Delete to the server. Otherwise, I would have done Control-Alt-Delete on both the host and the guest. Then I'm going to log in. So welcome, guys, to the fun world of server admin.
It would appear to have its trials and tribulations.
Indeed. We still get a failure. Error destination unreachable. The web management services is the #1 cause for this error. Let's make sure that we have Web Deploy installed by opening up that MSI again. So I'm going to go to Downloads and do Web Deploy again. And it'll tell us if it's already installed properly. So I'll do change. Wow. Where did this come from?
What happened there?
I don't know how that happened. The IIS deployment handler isn't installed.
Is it because we installed from custom?
It shouldn't be. That option should have been there. Okay, we're going to install IIS deployment handler. Also, if you want non-administrator accounts to be able to access this stuff, you would also install management server delegation and configure for non-administrator deployments. So I'm going to hit next and then change. Fun stuff.
It's not me that in the back of my head I just went, oh, Microsoft.
Look at that.
It's not just me, is it?
No. Look at that.
There it is. Valid connection.
We're going to hit next, Now, it's going to tell us what configuration we want to use. We want to use release. We'll talk about why that's important very shortly. We also do not want to remove additional files. We don't want to pre-compile, although you might want to. Pre-compile means that it pre-compiles all the views, and it offloads some time it takes to warm up ASP.NET to the development computer and off of the server. So it sometimes makes your site slightly faster when you immediately after a restart of the site. And then we have exclude files from the app data folder, which I don't care about because there's nothing in it. Then it tells me that the database provider for this connection string is not supported for incremental database publishing. Now that's fine because we have our own migrations built in, so we don't have to use web deploy to handle our database. Then I'll hit next, and I'll hit start preview. The preview is nice because it'll compile the package, and it'll tell me exactly what it's going to do on the server. In this case, it's just going to add a bunch of stuff because we haven't changed anything. So I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. And we published.
It looks like it published.
Let's see what exactly that did. If I open back up my VM and go to computer, local disk C, websites, simpleblog.dev, we have a website.
That is so sweet.
But we also have a problem.
That is not sweet. I don't see the problem.
Well, check it out.
I'm about to see the problem, aren't I?
Well, it's just going to give us a yellow screen of death, and it's not going to give us a reason why, because we're connecting from a remote computer, and I have it configured to not show errors remotely. But we're going to get an error. That error has to do with the database. Why does it have to do with the database? Well, I changed the database connection. I need to come in here, and I need to make sure that the web config that's deployed to the server is updated to work with the server. See, if I open up my web.config in Notepad on the server, we'll see that we're still using the main DB that uses the database of SimpleBlog. We set up our database as simpleblog_dev, right?
Right.
So how do we change this without going in here and manually updating the web.config? Remember, do not change files on the destination, because if you do, they'll be overwritten by the next deploy or publish. There are ways to ignore certain files for things like temporary files and uploads, but for the most part, there are ways to handle this without having to edit any files directly on the server. The way we handle it with ASP.NET is through what are called web transforms. Web transforms allow us to specify a transform script that will modify our web.config when it gets published to a destination.
Okie dokie.
The syntax is incredibly powerful, and it's already in fact being used. Whenever we deploy a package in our release configuration, our debug attribute gets removed from our compilation. Look good?
Looking good.
So what we need to do is they have an example already for our connection strings. This syntax with the XDT transform and XDT locator will allow us to update the database connection string from our local to our production, or staging, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I'm going to go back in my web config, and I'm going to copy and paste this connection string just so I can get the format right. I'm going to go back to web release, change this to main.db, which is the name of our connection string.
Yep.
And then I'm going to change the connection string. I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm going to update it by saying database equals simpleblog_dev. Now if I right-click on SimpleBlog and say publish, all I have to do is press this publish button. Boom. That was fast, right?
That was fast.
It's incredibly fast. It's incredibly fast because it only updates changes. Because as you can see, it only updated our web configs.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. I thought something must have gone wrong.
Nope. That means our web config is now correct, but we'll still have an error. If you want to see the actual error being displayed, it's not going to be displayed remotely, and it never, ever, ever, ever should be displayed remotely. But if you want to see the error, we can actually open up Chrome on the local computer, and actually won't be able to because we don't have the host entry. So I'll just tell you guys what the error is, because I'm like, I am telepathic or something. So I already know what the error is. The error is that we never actually migrated our database. Remember our database migration?
Uh-huh.
We never actually used it to set up our production database. See, if I log in with MySQL Workbench, we'll see that our simpleblog.dev is empty. There are no tables in it, and that's going to be problematic.
So what do we do?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Fluent Migrator onto the server, and then I'm going to run it against this DLL that contains our migrations. The DLL is simpleblog.dll. So on my desktop, I'm just going to create a folder called software. Obviously, we would want to organize this differently if this were really a production server, but for now, we'll just do that. Then under software, I'm going to create Fluent Migrator. And I'm going to make sure to name it the same name as the version of the NuGet package we installed, which is going to be -1.1.1.0. That way we can have multiple Fluent Migrators installed on the same computer. Then I'm going to open up my NuGet package, and I'm literally just going to go into the Tools folder, copy everything, and drag and drop straight onto my VM. Now, obviously, if you're not in a VM, you would have to use like an FTP software or a network share or something to move this over. But there we go. So what we want to do now is we want to write a bat file that will actually migrate our database. I'm just going to stick that on the desktop because that's where real sysadmins put their stuff. I also need to change the extension of this file, so I'm going to enable show file extensions in Explorer. And I'm going to call this migrate simpleblog.bat. Now, what is migrate simpleblog.bat going to do? It's going to invoke the Fluent Migrator. So let's go ahead and get the path to it.
Okie dokie.
I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to do migrate. Then I'm going to effectively copy all of the parameters that I have in my existing tools. Remember that if we go back into Visual Studio under tools, we never actually added it to the project, but that's fine. I don't really care. It's just for use locally. I'm going to find Open File in Explorer. I'm going to open up my tools folder. I'm going to grab my deploy dev.bat, and I'm basically going to copy all these parameters, go back into my virtual machine, paste them in, enable word wrap because this is ugly, and then I'm going to update them for my server. All I need to do really is update the path to where my simple blog is and where my web config is. Now, if you recall, I placed that under C, website, simpleblog.dev, bin. So I can simply do bin/simpleblog.dll for the target. Then for the config path, I'm simply going to do the path to the web.config. Sound good?
That sounds outstanding.
Awesome. And then I'm going to put a pause at the end so we can see the output. So let's go ahead and migrate our simpleblog.bat. Would you look at that?
Look at all that migration.
Yep.
It's like caribou.
I'm not necessarily sure about that, but we can verify that it worked by going back into MySQL Workbench and seeing all of our awesome tables have now appeared.
All right, excellent.
One more thing I want to do is I want to open up the users table, and I actually want to add a user in. Because we don't have any users yet, so we can't even log in. So I'm going to say nelsonlekay@gmail.com. Password hash, I'm just going to copy the password hash from my account. Which is my test password. That's all hashed properly. And then I'm going to hit apply. Next up, I'm going to go into roles and add the admin role. You would normally want to do this in a migration. I'm just saying. But yeah, we can also do this manually if we want. But typically,
Alrighty.
there's pros and cons to doing this in a migration, pros and cons of doing this in manually, pros and cons of doing this as part of a script, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of ways to do this. I'm just doing it manually here. So then I'm going to say insert into, autocomplete. Role users, user ID, role ID, values 1, execute, and error. No database selected. I'm just going to double click on simpleblog.dev to select it. And now we get one row affected. That means we now have a user on our site. So does our site work?
Yes, it should, shouldn't it?
Maybe. Check that out. So let's go ahead into the admin and add a post. Whoops. Admin/posts. Notice how I get sent to the login form. I'll log in with Nelson and test. And I get my admin.
Yay!
Let's go ahead and create a post. I'm going to grab some lorem. Now I'm going to go back to the front end. And look at that.
That looks awesome.
Indeed. So, with a few hiccups here and there that are pretty much expected, unless you're an expert sysadministrator, which I am not, by the way, we managed to be able to deploy our site to a real web server. Let's see a change. You want to see a change?
I do want to see a change.
That'd be really cool. So I'm going to change the color of the header. I actually got this color from a really cool website called Flat Colors. That is just like a grid of really nice looking colors.
That is.
Let's do, I don't know, Peter River. All you got to do is click on it, and it becomes copied on your clipboard. At least it should. There we go. Peter River is now copied on my clipboard. I go back to Visual Studio. I open up my Content Styles site, and I change my site header background. Now, obviously, by doing that change, it's not going to update the simpleblog.dev install because this is running on an actual real web server, on an actual real server. So what we need to do is we need to publish our change. We do that by right-clicking Simpleblog, going to Publish, hitting, oh, we could start the preview, by the way, which will tell us that only site has changed. And we hit Publish. Guess what? It's done. We can go back here. We can hit refresh. Wait for the site to spool back up.
And there we go.
Yep.
I like the other color better, but it worked.
Well, the point is that we can now make changes. Now, normally you wouldn't use the publish button in a team setting. It's really, really nice for small projects and personal projects. But in team setting, you would usually use a continuous integration server. Like I said earlier, web deploy is entirely automatable and can be used from any continuous integration server that you have. So don't worry about this technology only being applicable for people who like to deploy straight from Visual Studio. The stuff that we went through is very applicable to real website development. So Steve, how are you feeling?
I feel pretty good. We have created an awesome blog. We have shown them as complete a description as I think is even humanly possible to do. And we even deployed it at the end. I feel like God,
Awesome.
even though you're the only one who understands what actually happened.
At least most of it. I mean, obviously there were a couple blunders here and there, especially with the web server, but, you know, it happens. Okay, so I think this wraps up our really basic introduction to installing an ASP.NET MVC website on a Windows Server 2012 installation.
That is amazing.
Alrighty, we'll see you guys in the next video.
All right.